Hey guys, Basil and Will from Grayson Hobby, and today, what do we have, Will?
We're going to talk about the CL Racing F4S flight controller. This is the new one from CL Racing. Everybody knows the older CL Racing F4. One of the best, just got better.
So as Will says, he's going to go over it, and then we're going to give you some teasers of what we're going to do in the future for our next video. So Here it is.
Guys, if you're asking where the manual is, you can pull it up on our website for the documentation, but as well, the QR code right here, all you got to do is scan it, and it pulls up his website with a link, and it's going to have the full diagram information.
Update,
yeah, so if he does any updates, they'll be listed there. So today we have the new CL Racing F4S flight controller. This is the new one from CL Racing that is now the new improved version of the loved CL Racing F4. This is an awesome flight controller itself, and they took everything about it and made it better. This is a really nice flight controller. You still have your built-in PDB, so your motor tabs and all that still. You still have your ESC pads for motor 1, motor 3, there's motor 2, motor 4. And then you got a bunch. You'll notice there's a lot more solder pads up the top and the bottom. Starting at the bottom, you still have your VTX signal, power, ground. This is TX4, which is the UART4. You have RX4. You have the LED signal, a 5 volt for the LED, and a ground for the LED. So those are pins there. On the top side, you'll see Cam C, which is the first one. That's the control. That's to be able to hook up your OSD for the camera and be able to program the dynamic range, contrast settings, and all that in the camera through the on-screen display system on your through stick commands. And then you have your camera signal, camera positive, camera ground. Then you have your telemetry pad, 3.3 volt for the Spectrum satellite, the satellite signal pad, S-bus, 5 volt, and ground. So there's a whole bunch of pads on there, which is just a lot more than they had on the old one, because the old one actually had some on the long bottom. Now moving to the bottom of the board, we still have your SD card right here. This is the back of the flight controller now. This is the negative terminal and the positive terminal for the battery. That's your current sensor. A couple things you'll notice on this thing, you do not have a buzzer anymore. The buzzer they pulled off because it was that micro buzzer. People said it was too quiet, and with the new beta flight that you can run buzzers through the motor, there's really no need. But if you do want a classic buzzer, you can solder one in there. This right here, there's 2 solder pads here people need to be aware of. This is I believe it's what, INT and EXT. This is for internal and external current sensors. This is not for any inverting telemetry or anything like that. Some people said it was to invert or uninvert the telemetry pad for UART3. No, this is actually to turn, either because you can run, this wire here is for a 4-in-1 ESC, so you can run to that. But a lot of the 4-in-1 ESCs have a current sensor, so if they do, you can run an external current sensor there. Or the onboard internal if you're wiring it there. So if you're running an external 4-in-1 just for the signal and power for the flight controller, you're not going to use that. But if you're using the internal, it's that. So at the top of this board, you have your TX6 and TX1. So that's your UART 6 and 1 right there. So you got all this stuff there, but the board is extremely clean laid out. The one thing I love about this board, it's so easy to solder. The solder pads, they take solder very well, put a little flux on it, and it just flows right. You don't have to really apply a lot of heat like some of the other boards. You don't have to burn off any coating or anything. So on the top of the flight controller, we also have the version 1 had a 7.6 volt output to the camera and the VTX, and that was fixed. That was not adjustable. The new one has either a 5 volt or 9 volt, which is great because a lot of guys run TBS stuff. You need 5 volt for the newer, like the 5 volt version of the TBS, or you have 9 volt if you don't need that. So you'll have the ability to change that, and now that does control the camera and the VTX. So if you put 5 volt there, you need to make sure your camera can run at 5 volts, and it's not like some older 12 volt camera. Also, if it's 9 volt, you want to make sure you're not running like a CMOS camera that can't take over 5 volts, and your VTX is capable of 5 volts. So that's kind of a spot where it might catch you in a problem there, depending on your electronics there. But chances are, if you're buying the latest and greatest flight controller, you already have a good VTX and all that anyway. So that's one thing there. And another thing I'd like to point out, a lot of guys were talking about having the OSD blip out on the original F4, you can see here he put a bunch of capacitors across there. So this should be excellent noise filtering and eliminate any flickering on the OSD on the camera system. So I think this is a great layout here. I like the little 4-in-1. I'm not a big fan of 4-in-1 ESCs, but the fact that he has that ability there, and if you don't want to use the 4-in-1, you just take off the connector. So that's a great little option there. Extra little touch is the soft mount bobbins there.
Which come...
Yeah, they don't come installed, and the wire won't be installed. Still running the MPU 6000 gyro, which is a great, very stable gyro. It can't run the 32 hertz as far as I know yet, or still, but it is a very solid gyro that will do the 8K all day long. So, and I asked Chenlin, the manufacturer of the board, I asked him a couple questions here, and he did respond to me very quickly, which is excellent. Basically, one thing to keep in mind, the UART3 port, which is right here, the telemetry port, that is always inverted. But if you're gonna use FrSky Smart Port, you need to make sure you set the telemetry half duplex to off in the CLI, and we'll put a little note at the bottom of it here so you can see what we're talking about. But there is a CLI command you need to put on to make sure the inversion's off. I think the newest Betaflight's already done that, but it's always constantly updating, so there's a couple things there. Also, if you're gonna run the external buzzer, if you're running Betaflight 3.2.1, he also mentioned that you need to set the beeper frequency to 0 in the CLI. That's another thing we'll put at the bottom there. But there's a couple different commands that...
All right, I noticed the original one has an arrow.
Yeah, there's actually... Okay, that might be the only negative so far that I can really say on this one. There's no orientation document on the actual board. It is on the manual, the download. But as far as the actual board, basically just know that the battery leads go to the back of the quad.
So that would be, if I'm flying it, it would go like that.
Yeah, the battery leads are at the bottom.
Front.
Back of the quad. So the front of the quad, the lettering faces forward. You read it like normal.
So you run through all that mumbo jumbo, but
basically boils down to, this is an awesome flight controller. If you're going to buy a new flight controller for any of your quads, I think this is the one to go with for sure.
It does everything, right?
It does everything I want it to do and more for sure. It has a smart port capability. You can program your camera. Not only can you do Betaflight OSD, which it already had before, so you have Betaflight OSD, adjust PIDs, rates, all that stuff right through the on-screen display, but you can also go through stick commands and mimic the little toggle controller for like run cams and Foxeer cameras is what's supported. You can change all the settings in your camera for that without having to plug in a wire, dig through your quad, especially for a lot of tight quad builds to where you can't get to the back of the camera plug, or you have to run a wire out there and it might get caught in something. But you can program the camera without having to take anything apart. You do it right through the stick commands on your radio.
Programming as the contrast,
dynamic range, exposure, all those features, the filtering. If you have the newer run cams that have like the presets, like the twilight, the daytime, and all that stuff, you can go through the presets through the stick commands, which is great. It makes it to where you don't have to carry a bunch of accessories with you. Now you just have the radio. The 5-volt, 9-volt, I like that because the 7.6 made it kind of odd. I think the 7.6 was a little low for some of the cheaper VTXs out there, but it worked on most of the other stuff. But you also had guys that would use the Unify Pros that were the 5-volt only, the 5-volt version, and they were blowing the VTXs out. So I think having the ability there, but do note it does come on the 9-volt, not the 5-volt. So if you are running TBS, the 5-volt stuff, then make sure you switch it over. Yeah, so that's pretty much everything there in a nutshell. This is just an awesome flight controller. I've been very impatiently waiting for this one, so this is going to go in one of my aux frames very, very soon.
Aux frame? What is an aux frame?
This quad right here is my aux 215, and I've been running the CL version, the F4 in there, version 1. This is the newer one. I'm going to be putting this in my aux frame as well, and I know I've talked to a couple customers and hinted that we're going to do a build video down the road. It's probably going to be this frame right here, I believe.
Why that frame?
Because it's super easy to build. This is a super durable quad. It flies awesome. It's a true X. It's easy to tune, and then when you pair it with a flight controller like this, it's just a whole bunch of awesome.
What material is that?
This is HDPE or something like that.
Non-conductive?
It's composite. Yeah, it's not conductive, so you don't have to worry about shorting stuff out. It's just going to be a fun build. Also going to do a how-to video on how to put the CL Racing F4S in the Wizard 220. Basically, you know, I know a lot of guys are still flying the Wizards, but they want that OSD, they want some of the newer features and all that, but they didn't like the 220S because of the issues that came about, etc. So we're going to do a video on how to take your Wizard 220 and put the F4 in it. That will give you the OSD, VBAT, current sensor, all that good bells and whistles on it, and really update your quad. Basically, this quad will be the $5 million man, and you'll be able to upgrade and make it better than it was before with a very easy upgrade.
That's a great flying quad. I can't imagine it with.
Yeah, you take a great flying quad and then you update it with a better flight controller with all the newest bells and whistles, and it's right back to
yeah.
So we'll be doing that as well. That's one of the things there. But enough about the other quads. But this guy's right here. This is I wouldn't say it's necessarily a game changer, but I think this is the flight controller. This is a flight controller made by an FPV racer who. You know, he took what he wanted out of a quad, or what he wanted out of a flight controller, and put in one. I like this board, flight controller, mainly because one, is designed by someone that does fly. It's not designed by somebody that's never flown a quad.
And it's not a clone.
It's not a clone of anything. It's original, so it's not like a clone of a clone of a clone that they changed something and the firmware doesn't work with this. It's all original. I think this thing is probably the go-to flight controller for 2017, possibly all the way through part of 2018, depending on what changes.
I think all the way 2019.
2019? Not for a flight controller. He'll have another version by then.